its meaning, nature, scope, auditors liability for undetected frauds, fraud auditing, forensic audit phases, then its recognition and planning, evidence collection and evaluation, and at last communication of results. Then unit second is about fraud definition and taxonomy, in which you will study the ingredients of fraud, why is fraud committed and who commits the fraud, meaning and nature of a corporate fraud, concept of frauds under Companies Act 2013, then frauds for and against company, and who are the victims of fraud. Unit second is about that. Then unit third, types of corporate frauds, in which bribery, what is bribery and correction, how misappropriation of assets being done in a company, then how financial statements can be manipulated, procedures, really, what are the procedures related to frauds, what is corporate espionage, then frauds related to e-commerce, how these frauds can be prevented, and how consumers and businesses can be prevented from having frauds. Okay, so this is about your unit third. Unit fourth is basically related to your case studies and with examples how banking frauds have been occurred in economy, along with we will discuss about some cases about internationally that had occurred, then related to banking frauds, related to insurance frauds and capital market frauds. Now last unit is regarding your fraud management. Fraud management is basically the contents that we will cover are fraud detection, what are the symptoms of fraud, then how to investigate fraud, what are the methods you had to use, and how fraud reports you had to report and manage, then how you can manage those frauds, culmination, consequences and policy implications of the corporate frauds, and resolution of frauds, and lastly legal follow up. So these are basic general overview regarding your units. So one by one we will discuss about it. Every unit, each content we will do revision. If you had any doubt you can ask me. Okay, so let's start. I'm going to share my screen. Just a second. Share screen. Um, okay, my screen is visible to everyone. Is my screen is visible to everyone? Please respond. Is my screen is visible to everyone? Madhu, Ayushi, admit all. Bhavya and Priya are admitting. Okay. Screen is where? Okay, so regarding your first unit, it is about your forensic accounting and fraud auditing fundamentals. What it says, forensic accounting, what it is basically involves the application of accounting principles and investigation techniques to uncover the financial irregularities or discrepancies. It requires reconstruction of your financial records, analyzing the transactions and providing experts' opinion in legal matters. Forensic accountants may work on the cases that involves fraud, embezzlement, bankruptcy, and disputes. Okay, so forensic accounting is what? Is the application of your accounting principles and then investigating techniques to uncover the real truth regarding your financial irregularities and discrepancies. And what is fraud auditing? Fraud auditing is a subset of the auditing only, which especially focuses on identifying the fraudulent activities within an organization. So fraud auditors, what they had to do, they had to examine the financial records, internal controls, business processes, so that they can detect any, if they can detect any signs of fraud, such as misappropriation of assets or bribery or financial statement fraud. So this is their duty to examine the financial records and internal control checks and business process so that they can identify the fraud. So fraud auditing is that is the meaning. So forensic accounting and fraud auditing, in that you had to know the basic meaning of both terms, that forensic accounting and fraud auditing. Now if I say about nature, it is disciplinary in nature. Why? Forensic accounting and fraud auditing requires blend of accounting, auditing, investigating, legal skills. Okay, not only one skill they required accounting skills, auditing skills, investigating, legal skills. So professionals in these fields must have the deep understanding of financial transactions, accounting principles, accounting standards, auditing standards, and various other relevant laws that are related to it. Okay, so it is interdisciplinary in nature. Then its nature is proactive and reactive, based on proactive and reactive approaches. While if I say about proactive approach, involve its measures involve implementing the prevention controls and fraud detection techniques to minimize the frauds. While reactive approach, it is deployed after a fraud has been detected to investigate the extent of wrongdoing, how much that wrongdoing has been done, and gather the evidence regarding it, and then support it with through legal proceedings. So this is about the nature. When we talk about scope, ki how its scope is being discussed, it is related to its investigating services. कि जो forensic accountants and fraud auditors हैं, they are often called upon to investigate that suspected fraud or financial misconduct, which may involve examining the financial records or interviewing the witnesses, conducting data analysis, or preparing the reports detailing every findings. Okay, so investigating services is the scope. Then second is litigation support. Forensic accountants frequently provide experts that witness the testimony and litigation support in legal procedures related to their financial disputes or fraud allegations or regulatory investigations. So they help the attorneys to understand the complex financial issues and present their findings effectively in the court. Basically, litigation, what it means in Hindi, इसको बोलेंगे मुकदमेबाजी. So जो litigation support है, forensic accountants जो हैं, they frequently provides the experts that witness that testimony and litigation support related to legal procedures, uh, proceedings that may be related to your financial disputes or fraud allegations or regulatory investigations. Okay, now fraud prevention and detection is also the scope, how they can protect the fraud and prevent the fraud and detect that. How, first of all, detect it, and then how they can prevent it. So beyond doing the investigations related to fraud, professionals also play an important role in helping organizations to prevent the fraud, first of all to detect, to find out that fraud, and then to prevent it in the future. So it involves assessing the internal controls, identifying the vulnerabilities, and then implementing the measures to strengthen fraud prevention efforts. Okay, now next scope is regarding compliance and regulatory matters. Forensic accounts and fraud auditors must assist the organizations in ensuring that they are in compliance with relevant laws, that they are following the relevant laws, rules, regulations, and industry standards. They must conduct compliance reviews, means they should review whether the organization is following various laws, regulations, industry standards or not. They should assess the regulatory risks and help in developing the policies and procedures to mitigate these risks. Okay, so this was about your scope and meaning. In summary, we can say that these are the forensic accounting and fraud auditing are the essential disciplines that involves application of accounting, auditing, then investigating techniques to detect these, invest and prevent these financial frauds and misconduct. So they play a very important role, a critical role in safeguarding the integrity of financial systems and supporting the legal process in case of fraud or financial disputes. Now next topic regarding unit first is first one was meaning, nature, and scope that we have discussed. Next is what is the auditor's liability for these undetected frauds, how auditor is being liable and what are his duties and responsibilities regarding these undetected frauds. First of all, the liability of auditors for undetected fraud is very complex and continuous issue in the realm of forensic accounting and fraud auditing. So there are some key points that should be regarding audit that are regarded to auditors liability in regard to it. First is your legal standard. Legal standard means ki auditors are typically held to certain legal standards and professional guidelines while performing audit. So these standards vary according to jurisdiction, but it also includes the principles which are outlined by the auditing standard boards and regulatory bodies. So they had to be held certain regarding the legal standards and professional guidelines. Then second is about responsibility versus liability. Means auditor has a responsibility to conduct the audit with due care and professional skepticism while aiming to detect the material misstatements, which includes frauds. Financial statements में frauds हो सकता है. It may include the frauds in financial statements. Here skepticism means doubtful activities. Okay, so what is the responsibility of auditor? His responsibility is to find out if he or she is doubtful about any activity, then he had to detect that misstatements, which includes frauds in financial statements also. So with due care and professional skepticism means if professionally doubtful he is, then he had to detect that fraud. Then it's important to distinguish between the responsibility and liability. While auditors have a duty to perform their work diligently, they may not be always be liable for undetected frauds. So it depends upon various factors. Third is your reasonable assurance. Reasonable assurance means कि जो auditors हैं, they are not sure about the absolute assurance regarding the accuracy of financial statements. Means while they strive to detect the material misstatements or financial frauds or frauds in financial statements, they can't guarantee that all fraud will be detected, particularly if it is sophisticated, well concealed, and it involves collusion. Okay, collusion means a secret agreement. Okay, तो अगर ऐसा fraud जो कि बहुत ही sophisticated है, well concealed है, और एक secret agreement है, involves collusion, so in that case auditor can't guarantee that all fraud will be detected. So he can only provide a reasonable assurance regarding it. Then fraud risk assessment. Fraud risk assessment means auditors are required to assess the risk of fraud. Means as a part of their auditing planning process, they had to assess the risk related to a particular fraud that they had identified or will identify. So accordingly, what is the risk behind that fraud? So they should consider the factors such as the nature of entity, industry risk, internal control environment, past incidents of that fraud. Okay, so fraud risk assessments are not foolproof, but auditors may not always identify. We can't say that auditors will always identify the all potential fraud risks. So we can't say that auditors may not always identify all potential fraud risks, but this is the scope कि they had to find out. Third is professional judgment. Professional judgment means कि auditors exercise professional judgment throughout the audit process, including assessing the risk of fraud, designing the audit procedures, evaluating the audit evidence. So while they must maintain objectivity and skepticism again, it means doubtful. So their judgments must subject to review in cases where fraud is later discovered. कि अगर fraud is discovered later, then in that case, whatever the judgments they have given, it should be reviewed. Okay, so auditors professional judgment here, it means कि जो auditors हैं, they should exercise professional judgment throughout their audit process. Okay, while assessing the risk related to fraud or while assessing the designing audit procedures or evaluating the audit evidence. Then next is legal liability. Auditors can face the legal liability for detecting or for failure of their detecting the material misstatements ki wo nahi kar paye, they fail to detect the material misstatements. Those are very important, including frauds in financial statements. If they determine that they did not perform the audit procedure accordingly while following the accounting standards, or if they were negligent or reckless in their actions. So here, liability is not automatic or is typically assessed based on factors such as the auditor's degree of fault or significance of undetected fraud and whether the auditor compiled with the professional standards. So auditors can face that legal liability. Okay, कि अगर वो गलती से या they fail to detect the material misstatements कि जो fraud है उसको वो detect नहीं कर पाए in financial statements, they did not perform their audit procedures well in accordingly कि जो accounting standards हैं उसके according उन्हें audit procedure follow up करना था, उसके according उन्हें देखना था, तो they were negligent at that time or reckless in their actions. So auditors can face in that case a legal liability. Then litigation and regulatory actions. In cases where undetected frauds result in financial losses, ठीक है, जहां पे आप ऑडिटर जो है फ्रॉड्स को डिटेक्ट नहीं कर पाया, एंड इन दैट केस if there is a financial loss or harm to the stakeholders are the persons who are directly or indirectly related to business, so auditor may face litigation from the affected parties or regulatory actions from the oversight bodies. Okay, so लिटिगेशन एंड रेगुलेटरी एक्शंस मींस कि जो अनडिटेक्टेड फ्रॉड्स हैं अगर उनको वो नहीं आइडेंटिफाई कर पाए और उसकी वजह से कोई भी पार्टी जो भी रिलेटेड है उस चीज से उनको अगर कोई फाइनेंशियल लॉस होता है, देन दे मे go to the court. So auditor may face the litigation and regulatory actions in that case. So these proceedings can result to, और उसका क्या result होगा if they face the litigation and regulatory actions? They may result in financial penalties कि उनको कोई financial penalty देनी पड़े. पेनल्टी के अलावा रेपुटेशनल डैमेज हो सकता है, उनकी रेपुटेशन डैमेज हो जाए. देन रिस्ट्रिक्शंस ऑन द ऑडिटर्स एबिलिटी टू प्रैक्टिस कि उनका जो प्रैक्टिस है वो बंद हो जाए. सो दीज आर द regulatory actions that they may suffer. Okay, in summary, if I can say that auditors have the duty to detect that misstatements including fraud in financial statements, their ability, this is their liability for undetected frauds depend on which is depending on various factors. So they had to detect the frauds, it is their liability. Then next is for fraud auditing, or you can say forensic audit phases. What are the fraud auditing phases that has to be covered? First is fraud auditing, as I also known as forensic audit. It involves systematic examination of financial records, transactions, and internal controls to identify and investigate these fraudulent activities within an organization. So this process typically consists of several phases that we will discuss one by one. First is planning phases. While doing the auditing process, what auditor has to do, he has to follow the systematic process, and that systematic process contains several phases. First one is your planning phase. Planning phase basically is engagement planning. It includes engagement planning, risk assessment, and resource allocation. And second is information gathering phase. After planning, you had to gather the information. And third is your analytical review phase. Then you had to review. And last is after that testing phase. And last is your reporting phase and legal consideration. For these 6 phases, while auditing an auditor has to face. So we will discuss it again one by one. First one is planning phase. Planning phase basically includes engagement planning, risk assessment, and resource allocation. Engagement planning, it includes, you had to define during this planning phase the scope, objective, and timeline of the forensic audit. कि कितना scope है, how much activities you had to cover up, the objectives behind it, and what is the time gap कि time आपका कितना होना है, 1 year, 6 months, quarterly, fortnightly, 1 week, or in a day. So that time duration you had to define. Okay. Second is risk assessment. Risk assessment means कि auditor has to evaluate the risk factors related to the fraud. including industry specific risk or internal control weakness or past incidents of fraud. So develop a risk based approach to prioritize the audit procedures. Then next is resource allocation. Resource allocation means कि जो आपके resources हैं, that includes personnel with expertise in accounting, auditing, data analysis, or investigation techniques. So those personals should be uh, should be allocated necessary resources. So allocate those necessary resources, which includes your personnel with expertise in accounting, auditing, data analysis, and investigation techniques. Now, next phase after planning कि आपका जो ऑब्जेक्टिव क्या है, स्कोप क्या है, टाइम कितना रहेगा उस चीज को एसेस करने का, एक्टिविटीज, देन रिस्क कितना है उन फैक्टर्स से रिलेटेड, और कितने आपके पर्सनल्स जो एक्सपर्ट्स हैं वो इस चीज में लगेंगे, दोज हु आर रिक्वायर्ड रिलेटेड टू अकाउंटिंग, ऑडिटिंग, डेटा एनालिसिस एंड इन्वेस्टिगेशन टेक्निक्स. दैट इज अबाउट प्लानिंग फेज. ये सब पहले से ही ऑडिटर को प्लान करना है कि कितना उनको स्कोप रहेगा, कितना एक्टिविटीज रखने हैं, क्या ऑब्जेक्टिव्स हैं, क्या टाइमलाइन है, हाउ मच द रिस्क दे आर गोइंग टू असेस, देन how much resource allocation, basically how much experts they, how many experts they are they need, how many experts they need for this investigation. Okay, whether they are related to accounting, investigation, auditor, auditing, then data analytics, data analysis से related analytics हो सकता है, and investigation techniques. Now next phase is your information gathering phase. It includes document review, interviews, and data collection. Document review basically includes auditor had to review the relevant documents, those which are very important, which includes financial statements of the company, accounting records, along with that policies and procedures and internal control documentation. So these are the most prominent documents that has to be reviewed. So for that purpose, in information gathering phase, auditor has to collect the document revenue information. Then second is interview. He has to conduct interviews with the personals, which includes employees, managers, executives, other persons from, or you can say those which persons or executives which are much important, those who can provide the internal data, so that they can gather the information and identify the potential fraud schemes and understand the business process. Okay, after document review and collecting information through interviews, then they had to collect the data and then analyze it from various sources. जैसे कि for example, if they had collected accounting data, then they can analyze it from the accounting systems, electronic records, bank statements, emails, communication channels. Means they had to analyze कि whether the data that they had collected, they are in according to they are shown in their accounting systems, they are appearing in the accounting system, in electronic records, in bank statements they are appearing. Okay, so this is about information gathering phase. Okay, just a second. Okay, now next is your analytical review phase. Analytical review phase, it includes financial analysis, ratio analysis, and trend analysis. Analytical basically includes these three things. In financial analysis, what you do, you identify the anomalies, unusual patterns, and discrepancies that may include fraud. कि unusual patterns like कि आप कोई अकाउंटिंग फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट का कुछ डेटा देख रहे हो और उसमें कुछ पैटर्न्स ऐसे देखे, दोज आर नॉट यूजुअली अकरिंग. ओके, अनयूजुअल, दोज आर वेरी अनयूजुअल, so that may indicate that it is a fraud. So what you had to do, you had to take that figure or that data, and then you had to compare it with the actual one, और actual data जो भी आया है, that you had to compare with the benchmarks that organization has set, and on that basis you can indicate कि अगर unusual pattern है, तो you can then check it with the that actual with the standard one, and then you can find out the fraud if there are. Okay, so financial analysis you had to do if you observe, if a auditor observe an unusual pattern regarding the things. Then second is ratio analysis. Then auditor has to analyze the financial ratios also, so that they can assess the right financial strength of the business, financial position of the business, its liquidity conditions, solvency and profitability conditions. So they had to look deviations from the typical industry benchmarks to the historical averages, and if they are in doubtful skepticism phase, then they had to analyze it, the actual one with the standard one. Then third is trend analysis. Trend analysis means related to revenues and expenses, cash flows, inflows and outflows. They had to analyze the trend. If they are analyzing the trend and in that they identify some irregularities or suspicious patterns, then they had to do the analysis. Again, they had to uh, match the compare the actual performance with the standard performance. The next phase is testing phase. After analyzing financial analysis, ratio analysis and trend analysis, now next is your testing phase. In testing phase, what auditor has to do? He has to select a sample of transactions in which by those sample of transactions he can do the detailed testing, which includes examination of the supporting documents, authorization procedures and compliance with the internal controls. Then internal control testing, it includes evaluating the effectiveness of internal control designed to prevent or detect fraud. So it is basically related to segregation of duties, assess authorization, access control, and monitoring activities. Then data analytics. In data analytics, they had to find out the outliers. Outliers are basically representing the fraudulent activities. So while using the data analytic techniques such as statistical sampling, Banford law analysis, or predictive modeling, they have to identify the anomalies, or you can say outliers, which are indicative of the fraudulent activities. Banford law analysis, here the term has been used. It means Banford law analysis basically is a mathematical principle that accurately predicts कि जो distribution है digits का in many types of data sets, what is the distribution. If it is repeated out of that random sample, तो अगर वो repeated है, then they can assume, they may be doubtful that there is a there may be a fraud. Okay, so we can say that it is basically is sets of random data number beginning in smaller digits, or numbers you can say which are in smaller digits that are occurring more frequently, and if they are occurring more frequently, then auditor may be suspicious about it. Okay, so Benford law analysis they can follow कि अगर कोई number small number और बार बार frequently occur हो रहा है in the data, then it means they may be fraud. Okay, so auditor may be in doubtful or skepticism position. Now next is your reporting phase. Reporting phase basically includes findings and recommendations and presentation of the results that auditor has identified. So findings and recommendation basically should be supported by the document, that is forensic audit के जो भी findings हैं, that should be supported through the document, including identifying instances of the fraud or its control weaknesses and recommendations for remediation की और वो जो recommendations देंगे what are they. Then presentation means कि through comprehensive report they had to summarize the forensic auditing findings, methodology and conclusion कि क्या forensic जो auditing है उसकी जो findings हैं उन्होंने क्या methodology adopt की है, what methodology they had adopted, and what are the conclusion regarding those investigation. They had to provide a comprehensive report regarding it. So present that report to the management, board of directors and other relevant stakeholders. So this is the reporting phase. Last in that, while reporting phase, they had also to consider the legal consideration, means they had to consult a legal counsel to assess the legal implications of the findings and recommendations, including potential regulatory reporting requirements, civil litigation, criminal prosecutions. Okay. Then last step or last phase is follow up phase. When they had identified the fraud, they had provide the report, plan कर लिया, सब हो गया. Then they have the follow up phase, which includes remediation planning and monitoring and compliance. Remediation planning means कि they had to collaborate with the management to develop a remediation plan to address the control deficiencies and strengthen the internal control and mitigate fraud risk identified during the forensic audit. To mitigate those identified fraud risks. Those are identified during the fraud investigation, during forensic audit, and then they had to collaborate with the management to develop regarding that fraud a remediation plan so that they can address the control deficiencies and strengthen their internal control. And then they had to monitor and compliance the things, means monitor the remediation measures that they had implemented, and then they had to assess the ongoing compliance and recommendations. So they had to provide online support and guidance to help to prevent the future incidents of the fraud. Then they had to provide the ongoing support and guidance so that they can prevent any future happenings of fraud. Okay, कि कोई future में happening ना हो fraud की. So throughout this forensic audit process, it is essential for auditors to maintain objectivity, to maintain professionalism, confidentiality, while conducting their investigations and communicating their results or findings to the stakeholders. So collaboration with the management, legal counsel, and other relevant parties is a critical to ensure a thorough and effective response to identified fraud risk. So this was about various phases of forensic audit. Now, regarding recognition and planning, recognition and planning are crucial initial steps while conducting forensic account and audit. So it has developed, it delve into the fundamentals of recognition and planning in specialized fields. First, when we are saying what we had to recognize while doing a forensic audit, it includes these points, these major factors, you can say, or these are the specialized fields. First is identification of the red flags. Identification of the red flags, it may include the discrepancies in the financial records or unusual things that auditor has observed while or of suspicious activities from various internal sources or whistleblowers. So red flags they had to identify. So forensic accountants and fraud editors must adapt at recognizing the potential indicators of frauds and financial irregularities. Okay, these red flags may include these frauds, different types of frauds. Then they had to do the continuous risk assessment. Okay, conducting a thorough risk assessment is essential to identify the areas of vulnerability within the organization, which may include analyzing the factors such as industry risk, organizational structure, internal control, past incidents of fraud, या फिर regulatory environment या external pressure है, that may increase the likelihood of that fraudulent activity कि वो बार बार occur हो. So while conducting a thorough risk assessment, it is essential for an auditor to identify areas of vulnerability within an organization. Then initial investigation. Upon identifying the potential red flags or the areas of concern, forensic accountants must conduct initial inquiries or investigations so that they can gather the preliminary evidence and determine the scope and depth of further examination. कि वो initial inquiries और investigation gather करने के बाद एक preliminary evidence gather करेंगे, इकट्ठा करेंगे, और उसके basis पे they will determine the scope and depth of further examination कि उन्हें कितना scope और कितनी detail में वो investigation करनी है. So this may involve reviewing the documents, interviewing the key personals, or performing the data analysis to assess, to know the nature and extent of suspected irregularities. So initial investigations they had to do. Then next is planning. This was about recognition, and in next planning, what it includes: engagement planning, team composition, resource allocation, risk-based approach, legal and ethical considerations, and documentation and communication. Engagement planning basically it includes the objective, scope क्या है, objective क्या है, methodology क्या है, forensic accountant fraud engagement की, fraud audit engagement की, that they had to define what is the objective, scope, and methodology. Then they had to clarify the purpose behind investigation, why they are doing the investigation, who are the various stakeholders involved in that, and what are the desired outcomes. So a detailed plan outlining the steps, resources, and timeline required, they had to develop the detailed plan, okay, so that their investigation is being done effectively and efficiently. Then team composition basically includes various fields of experts. While doing investigation, they need experts from various fields, like in accounting field, in auditing field, एक accountant चाहिएगा उनको, auditor चाहिएगा, then financial analysis के लिए financial analyst, they require data analytics, investigation techniques के लिए. So they had to uh, assemble the multidisciplinary team, जो अलग अलग fields के experts and they had to assemble that team while doing any investigation. And then they had to assign the roles and responsibilities to each expert. Experts are there now, team members. So each team member should know about their responsibility based on their skills, experience, adequate coverage of all aspects related to the investigation. Then next is resource allocation. Resource allocation means when they had assembled the whole team of their experts, those who are required while doing the investigation, then what they had to do, they had to allocate the resource, personal technology, tools and equipments which are necessary to support that investigation. So they had to consider factors such as complexity of the case, the volume of the data that has to be analyzed, and the need for specialized experts to support that investigation. The next is a risk-based approach. Risk-based approach basically, while doing the investigation, they had to prioritize the areas which focus and allocates the resources efficiently. ठीक है, तो they had to prioritize those areas जिनमें उन्हें focus करना है और resources को allocate करना है. So they had to identify high risk areas or transactions that warrant the closer scrutiny, ठीक है, and allocate additional attention and resources accordingly. So they had to consider potential impact of fraud on financial statements, regulatory compliance, reputation, stakeholders confidence. Then risk-based approach. Then next is legal and ethical consideration. Legal and ethical consideration throughout the planning process, they had to consider, auditor has to consider the legal and ethical considerations, which are according to relevant laws, regulations, professional standards. Okay, whatever according to law, regulation, professional standards, legal and ethical consideration they had to consider while doing the planning process. They had to consult with legal counsel to ensure that कि जो investigation they had done or conduct is according to the legal requirements, accordingly legal requirements के साथ ethical guidelines they had followed, and they had to address any potential legal implications or risks. So all things they had considered while doing the investigation. Then last is documentation and communication. Documenting the planning process includes objective, scope, methodology, key decisions made, and जब हम ये मेथोडोलॉजी, ऑब्जेक्टिव क्या है, स्कोप क्या है, मेथोडोलॉजी क्या है, टाइमलाइन क्या है, ये सारे डिसीजंस हो गए, तो उसके बाद दे हैड व्हाट दे हैड टू डू, दे हैड टू कम्युनिकेट दैट इन्वेस्टिगेशन प्लान्स टू द रिलेवेंट स्टेकहोल्डर्स इंक्लूडिंग मैनेजमेंट, बोर्ड ऑफ डायरेक्टर्स, लीगल काउंसिल, एक्सटर्नल ऑडिटर्स, to ensure the alignment and transparency regarding that investigation, regarding the objectives and expectations of the investigation. Okay, so these are by diligently recognizing the potential red flags and carefully planning the investigations, forensic accountants and fraud auditors can lay a solid foundation for conducting a thorough, effective examination of financial irregularities and suspected fraudulent activities within an organization. Now, this was about recognition and planning. Now, next is about evidence collection and evaluation. Just a second. Now, next topic is regarding in your first unit, evidence collection and evaluation. Evidence collection and evaluation are basically the most important phases while doing forensic accounting and fraud auditing. because they form, they are, you can say they are the base for uncovering that fraudulent activities and supporting the findings of the investigation. So what are the fundamentals of evidence collection and evaluation in these specialized fields? First is documentary evidence. When you talk about evidence, it is divided into three phases. What are those? These 3 to 4 phases. First is documentary evidence. Documentary evidence basically in the form of document whatever evidence the auditor or forensic accountant is collecting, that is in the form of document which includes financial records. जैसे कि आपके financial records include बैंक के statements हो गए, ledger invoices हो गए, receipts हैं, financial statements हैं, so that they can trace the transactions and identify the discrepancies. Second is correspondence. Correspondence in the form of emails, memos, contracts, or other communication that provides insights into the nature of transaction, agreement, instructions related to fraudulent activities. Policies and procedures. Review internal control documentation, policies and procedures to assess compliance and identify weaknesses that may have facilitated fraudulent behavior. तो यहाँ पे documentary evidence is related to what? चाहे वो financial record से related है, फाइनेंशियल रिकॉर्ड्स आपके फॉर्म में होते हैं कि आपके पास कंपनी की कोई बैंक स्टेटमेंट है, उसके लेजर अकाउंट्स हैं, रेसिप्ट्स जो वो कंपनी ले रही है, फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट्स उसके हो सकते हैं. इसके अलावा करस्पॉन्डेंस में उनकी मेल्स जो है, ईमेल अकाउंट जो है वो चेक किए जा सकते हैं, मेमोज हो सकते हैं, कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स इफ दे हैड डन, अदर कम्युनिकेशंस और भी हो सकते हैं जिनके थ्रू दे कैन ऑडिटर कैन आइडेंटिफाई, फॉरेंसिक ऑडिटर can identify the nature of transactions, agreements, instructions related to the fraudulent activities. Along with that, they can also review the internal control documentation. Internal control documentation मतलब कि जो policies बनाई हैं, जो procedures हैं, जो compliance के कि ये standards, accounting standards, they had to follow these accounting laws, they has to follow. So those internal policies and control, what are they can identify that. Okay, so through identifying that, they can identify the fraudulent activity if they suspect any unusual behavior. Okay, so documentary evidence is related to that. Then second is physical evidence. Physical evidence means in the form of assets or inventory or signs or document, signatures and documents. Assets and inventories physically means कि आप कुछ ऐसे assets हैं जो कि आपने physical देखे हैं, inventory है, tangible items हैं जिनको आप देख सकते हो, छू सकते हो. Intangible means those assets or items that you can't touch and that you can't see. But intangible assets, tangible assets are what? Those which can be touched and which can be seen. So if there are some assets or inventories which are tangible one, so they can verify their existence, their condition and their ownership. So if they look any signs of misappropriation or manipulation regarding it, जैसे कि missing inventory है, कुछ assets वहां पे missing है, या asset records are changed or manipulated, उनको alter किया गया, so those physical evidences they can collect. Along with that, signatures and documents, they can collect physical documents regarding signatures, handwriting samples, they can collect so that they can verify the authenticity, reliability and detect the forgeries and alteration. Forgeries means जालसाजी, कि गलती से किसी का, गलती से नहीं, जो जानबूझ के जो है सिग्नेचर किसी का कॉपी कर लिया और उसको यूज कर लिया. तो वहां पे सिग्नेचर्स हैं, हैंडराइटिंग डिटेक्शन के थ्रू के हैंडराइटिंग के सैंपल्स ले लिए, वेदर इट इज बीइंग रिटन बाय दैट पर्सन ओनली और नॉट. सो दे इन द फॉर्म ऑफ दैट दे कैन कलेक्ट द फिजिकल एविडेंस. देन नेक्स्ट इज डिजिटल एविडेंस. डिजिटल एविडेंस इज इलेक्ट्रॉनिक रिकॉर्ड. बेसिकली जो इलेक्ट्रॉनिकली आप रिकॉर्ड करते हो, डिजिटली रिकॉर्ड करते हो जो चीजें, दोज आर योर डिजिटल एविडेंस. इन दैट इलेक्ट्रॉनिक रिकॉर्ड्स you had to extract and analyze the electronic data from the computers, databases, from digital storage devices, and which may include examining the transaction log, assess the records and deleted files. कि जो delete कर दिया files उनको आप निकालो, identify करो. जो auditor है, forensic auditor or accountant, they can assess the deleted files, और जो भी उनके transactions हैं उनको recheck कर सकते हैं. email के through जो भी email communication they had done, chats के through, logs के through, electronic communication for evidence of collusion, fraud schemes, incriminating conversations, they can do that. जो ईमेल है उनके email communication chats के through उनको भी वो review कर सकते हैं. They can also do the review through email communication, chat logs and electronic communication. So what does this word collusion means? Collusion means if there is any secret agreement that they hadn't disclosed. Okay, so through digital evidence they can find out. Next is interviews and testimony. They had to witness the interview and experts the expert testimony, conduct interviews with relevant individuals, which may include employees, suppliers, whistleblowers, managers, customers, so that they can collect the information from these relevant individuals whose statements are very important for them, and then on the basis of that they can obtain the statements and collaborate those evidences. Then experts testimony means subject matter experts such as forensic accounts and digital forensic specialist हैं, hand written analyst हैं, जो कि एक expert opinions जो provide करेंगे, ठीक है, related to each activity. So expert opinions on complex financial technical matters, they had to take the testimony from them. They had to do that expert testimony कि उन experts की help से उनको जो है test करना है whether these writings are by that person only, the person who is claiming that he has written it. Okay, then evidence evaluation. Evidence evaluation basically means कि whatever the evidence while doing the investigation and forensic auditor and accountant has collected, they had to evaluate that evidence whether it is being reliable or not. Okay, so first of all is related to its reliability and authenticity. Sources of reliability means assess the credibility and reliability of evidence sources, means कि जो भी sources in the form of evidence the auditor has collected, financial and forensic auditor has collected, that evidence accuracy की वो कितना सही है, कितना fair है, कितना सच है, they had to assess the accuracy of that financial record, then had to witness the integrity and expertise of expert witness or forensic specialist. Then authentication means they had to verify the authenticity and integrity of that documentary or digital evidence through various corroborating sources, forensic analysis, and chain of custody documentation. The next is relevance and materiality. Relevance means कि what is the relevance of that evidence that they had collected, whether it is being related to the objective of the investigation or not, whether it is being able to support the allegations of that fraudulent activity or not. So they had to evaluate that thing. Then they had to focus on collecting that evidence which is directly related to the suspected fraud scheme or फाइनेंशियल इरेगुलरिटी कि वो जो इन्वेस्टिगेशन कर रहे हैं उसका जो ऑब्जेक्टिव है, वेदर दैट इन्वेस्टिगेशन से रिलेटेड जो भी उन्होंने कलेक्ट किया है evidence, whether it is being relevant to it or not, whether it is being supporting that or not. Okay, so they had to identify, they had to evaluate that thing. Then next is materiality. Materiality means they had to consider the materiality of the evidence, means in the context of significance to overall investigation कि जो उसकी importance है, whether it is being related to overall investigation or not, its potential, whether it is having a potential impact on the financial statements, regulatory compliance, or legal proceedings or not. Okay, so what is the materiality of that evidence? They had to support it also. Then next is corroboration and consistency. Corroboration means seek corroboration evidence from multiple sources or sources independent of each other so that they can strengthen the reliability and credibility of the findings. Okay, so consistency across different types of evidences enhances confidence in investigate conclusions. Then contradictions and inconsistencies while doing the investigation they had to identify the contradictions, inconsistencies or discrepancies within that evidence that may indicate attempt to conceal or manipulate information. So scrutinize those conflicting accounts or discrepancies between documentary and testimonial evidence. So they had to, what they had to do, they had to scrutinize that conflicting accounts, or you can say scrutinize those discrepancies between the documentary and testimonial evidence. testimonial evidence. So this thing they had to do. Then admissibility and legal considerations. Admissibility and legal consideration, basically here what they had to evaluate, they had to evaluate the admissibility of evidence in legal proceedings based on rules of evidence, relevancy, authenticity and reliability. कि जो legal proceedings हैं, they had to admit or they had to admissibility, evaluate the admissibility of evidence in relation to legal proceedings. Or legal proceedings, those are based on rules of evidence, those are based on relevancy, those are based on authenticity, whether they are reliable or not. Okay, so they had to ensure that evidence collection and its handling comply according to the legal standards and procedural requirements. की जो evidence collect किया, that is evidence is sorry, they had to ensure that the evidence they had collected, that is handled according to the legal standards and procedural requirements. Illegally that thing has not been done. Then privileged information in respect to confidentiality and legal privileges such as attorney client privilege या फिर work product doctrine है, जहां पे collect करना और evaluate करना evidence को to avoid the legal challenges or ethical breaches. So they had to respect that confidentiality, okay, and that legal privileges. Then documentation and reporting. Documentation means jo bhi evidence they had collected, whatever evidence they had collected, including its source, nature, relevance, its chain of custody, they had to maintain the detailed documentation of that. Okay, so they had to maintain a detailed documentation of the evidence that they had collected. And then they had, and then that evidence should be supported by the integrity and reliability of the findings. Then reporting. While investigation after these things has been done, they had to present the findings and conclusions based on that evaluation of evidence in a clear, objective and well documented manner. Okay, a clear report banani hai with objective, defined and well documented. So they had to prepare a comprehensive report, not a brief one, a comprehensive report that document the investigation process. That document means that includes the investigation process, evidence that they had collected, analysis they had performed, and what are the conclusions they had reached. Okay, so everything in that report should be discussed and well documented. So while collecting and rigorously evaluating the evidence, forensic accountants and fraud auditors can effectively uncover the fraudulent activities by providing support of investigating by providing support for investigating activities and contribute to the resolution of financial disputes or legal proceedings. So these processes require a careful attention to all detail, adherence to professional standards, collaboration with relevant stakeholders, so that they can ensure the integrity and credibility of that investigation outcomes. Okay, so this was about this evidence collection and evaluation. So last topic of this first unit is, after doing these things, last step is to communicate the results of that investigation. So communication of the results of forensic accounting and fraud auditing investigation is very crucial aspect of the specialized fields. Why? Because it enables the stakeholders to understand the various findings they had find out, to make the informed decisions, to take appropriate actions. So while communicating the results, what are the fundamentals regarding it? So some fundamentals of communicating results in this forensic accounting and fraud auditing includes, first thing, clarity and objectivity, means clear and concise reporting should be done. कि जो भी findings they had done, whatever conclusions they had done, recommendations or suggestions they had suggested, they should be presented in a very clear, concise and accessible manner, so that it is being easily understandable by various stakeholders who are related to, directly or indirectly related to that investigation. Okay, so with varying levels of financial literacy or expert, every stakeholder can uh, read that findings, can understand those findings. So they had to present those findings of the investigations in very clear, concise and accessible manner, कि वो बहुत easily access हो जाए, clear हो, concise हो. Then second is about objective presentation. Objective presentation means while maintaining the objectivity and impartiality in presenting the results of the investigation, they have to avoid bias and speculation. Okay, so present those factual evidence, those are supported by documentation and analysis to support the conclusion and recommendations. So this was about first thing, clarity and objectivity. Second was stakeholders engagement. Stakeholder engagement includes tailored communication and timely updates. Means while customizing the communication approaches and formats to suit the needs and preferences of different stakeholders, जैसे कि stakeholders include your management, board of directors, legal counsels, regulatory authorities, and external auditors. So they had to customize the communication, that result in that format that is suitable to these various stakeholders according to their need and their preferences. They had to customize that communication process of the investigation, कि अपना जो communicate करना है investigation का result, what they had to do, they had to customize it according to the needs of various stakeholders, according to the needs and preferences of the various stakeholders. Then timely update means कि they had to provide timely update regarding the progress of investigation, significant findings, and emerging issues to keep stakeholders informed and engaged throughout the process. Okay, so timely, they had to at every step informed the various stakeholders, the various progress of the investigation, so that various stakeholders are informed about the investigation process, about each and every step, and they are engaged throughout the investigation process. Then comprehensive report. Comprehensive report basically includes detailed reporting, means whatever the findings, whatever the evidence they had collected, whatever the findings they had done, conclusions they had done, analysis they had performed, whatever methodology they had used while doing the investigation process, they have to prepare a comprehensive report of that investigation. In that they had to include each and every step of doing investigation, which methodology they had adopted, what resources they had done, collected, what evidences they had collected, analysis what they had performed, what are the findings, what are the conclusions, and what are the suggestions and recommendations regarding that investigation. So they had to include supporting documents and appendices as necessary to substantiate the findings. The next is structured format. Structured format means organize the reports in structured format with clear headings, sections, subsections to facilitate navigation and comprehension. So structured format means कि with clear heading and section subsections they had to report it in a structured format. Use tables, charts, visuals to illustrate the key points and enhance the readability. Then transparency and accountability. Transparent disclosure means disclose all the limitations, whatever the constraints and uncertainties that are associated with the investigation process. Include any constraints on access to information, limitations of procedures performed on reliance on the third party so they had a transparent disclosure, means they should not ऐसा कुछ नहीं रखना है उन्हें छुपा के, या उन्हें हर चीज डिस्क्लोज करनी है. ठीक है, जो भी फ्रॉड अकाउंटेंट एंड ऑडिटर हैं, फॉरेंसिक अकाउंटेंट एंड ऑडिटर हैं, दे हैड टू disclose the limitations and constraints and uncertainties related to the investigation process. Then accountability, they had to take the accountability, or you can say responsibility for the integrity and accuracy of the investigation की जो investigation के findings हैं that are very accurate, the conclusions are accurate, true and fair. Okay, so they had to take the responsibility of that accuracy of the investigative findings and conclusions, and should acknowledge the errors and omissions and areas of uncertainty. They had to acknowledge that also. So be prepared to address the questions, concerns, challenges raised by the stakeholders. Okay. The next is legal and regulatory considerations. Legal and regulatory consideration means compliance with the legal requirements that they had to ensure that they had, while communicating the investigation result, they are following the applicable legal requirements, जो भी rules and laws and procedures, and they are following those while communicating the investigation results. Okay, regarding the rules of evidence, confidentiality obligations or regulatory reporting obligations, everything they had to take care of. Then consultation with the legal counsel, कि जो legal counsel है उनकी जो appropriate legal counsel they need regarding the investigation, तो उनकी guidance seek guidance from that legal counsel on that appropriation communication strategy or content or timing, particularly the cases involving potential litigation, regulatory inquiries or sensitive issues. They had to consult with the legal counsel. So they had to this is also a regulatory or legal consideration you had to take into consideration, or you can say forensic accountant or auditor has to take into consideration. Then follow up and feedback. Follow up and feedback basically means when they had done the investigation and done everything, then actionable recommendations and feedback mechanism they had to go for. Actionable recommendation means provide actionable recommendations to stakeholders based on the investigations findings to address the control weakness, mitigate fraud risk, and prevent recurrence of that fraudulent activities कि वो दोबारा ना हो, reoccur ना हो. Okay, so they had to do the actionable recommendation कि ऐसे recommendation they had to give that can be taken into action. ऐसा ना हो कि बस ऐसे recommendation दे दिए जो कि सिर्फ files में और reports में रह गए, they are not taken into action. So they had to provide recommendations that may be taken into action by various stakeholders. Then feedback mechanism. Feedback mechanism basically they had to establish it to solicit the input, questions, feedback from various stakeholders of in relation to investigation result, and then they had to ensure their concerns are addressed. If they had provide their feedback, then whatever the feedback they had provided, their concern should be addressed, and additional information or clarification if they needed, that should be also provided. So this feedback mechanism also should be there. Then professionalism and confidentiality they had to maintain while conduct the communication of result with the professional experts or professionalism, respect, sensitivity, recognizing the potential impact of investigation on individuals, organizations, and relationships. Okay, while doing the investigation, whether they are while doing the investigation, whether they are doing investigation with an individual or organization, or whether they are related to their personal relations, they had to be professional with them. They had to respect the sensitivity. They had to recognize the potential impact of the investigation on those individuals. Okay, so they had to maintain that professionalism with those persons or those things. Okay, those persons or things. Okay, so next is confidentiality. Confidentiality means respect confidentiality obligations or legal privileges such as attorney client privilege while communicating investigation results to protect sensitive information and preserve the legal protections. Okay, तो अगर ऐसा कुछ है कि कुछ उन्हें डिस्क्लोज नहीं करना है, लीगल प्रोटेक्शंस को उन्हें प्रिजर्व करना है, sensitive information they had to protect while communicating the investigation, they had not to disclose the sensitive information in relation to that organization, and they had to provide confidentiality obligations and legal privileges, so they had to respect it. Okay, so by adhering to these fundamentals of communication, the forensic accountants and auditors can effectively convey the results of their investigations, facilitate the decision making, and contribute to the resolution of financial disputes or legal proceedings. So effective communication builds trust, enhance transparency, and foster the accountability among stakeholders involved in that investigation process. So this was about your unit first. If you do have any doubt, can ask. so that we can proceed to next unit. Any doubt regarding it, Anshika, Madhu, Priya? Okay. So next unit is about fraud definition and taxonomy, in which related to fraud, various things you will study. Like it includes what are the ingredients of fraud, why fraud is committed, who commits fraud, meaning and nature of corporate fraud, what is it, and what are the concepts of fraud under Companies Act 2013, frauds for and against the company, and victims, who are the victims of those fraud. Okay, so these things we will discuss about Unit 2. So, fraud can be defined as an intentional deception or misrepresentation made by an individual or entity with the objective to deceive others for their personal gains and to cause the harm. So, it involves deceptive practices which are aiming to manipulate the information, assets, resources so that they can achieve an unethical objective. Okay, it can occur in various contexts which may include financial transactions को manipulate करना, business operations गलत करना, government agencies को fraud करना उनके साथ, personal interactions के through. So what are the main key ingredients related to fraud, कि कब किस तरीके से हम किन किन चीजों को फ्रॉड एक्टिविटीज में इंक्लूड कर सकते हैं, व्हाट आर द इंग्रेडिएंट्स ऑफ द फ्रॉड. Okay, so first is about intent. Intent means fraud require a deliberate intention or a purpose to deceive, to manipulate or mislead others for personal gain or to cause harm. So a perpetrator must have the requisite mental state or meant to react to commit fraud knowingly. Okay, तो जानबूझकर fraud commit करना कि उनका intent था, they had the purpose to harm the people, to manipulate the records, to mislead others for their personal gains. This is the first ingredient कि they had the intent to do a fraud. Second is false representation. False representation means कि fraud often involves making false statements, representations या promise with the intent to deceive or harm others. Okay, this may include providing the wrong information or misleading information, falsifying documents, concealing the material facts to induce reliance or action by others. तो गलत चीजें रिप्रेजेंट करना, दिखाना, ठीक है, these false representation may include these things. गलत misleading information they may provide, गलत documents दिखाना, जो material facts हैं true उनको conceal करना, नहीं show करना, these includes all these things. Then materiality. Materiality is false representation of deception, or deception must be material, means it is significant or relevant enough to influence the decision or actions of the victim. कि जो false representation है वो significant और relevant है कि वो influence कर सके decision making किसी भी person का, और इससे क्या होगा, वो गलत decision लेगा और he or she will be a victim. So materiality is assessed based on impact of deception on the victim's perceptions or decision, कि वो कैसे perceive करता है person और किस तरीके के, based on that he or she is taking the decisions. Next is reliance. Reliance means कि it relies basically, victims जो होते हैं fraud के, they typically relies on the misrepresentations or false representations or assurance those are made by the perpetrator in taking certain actions. Okay, so in the form of contracts they can do that, making investments or wrong investments and providing the financial resources to the wrong person. So the perpetrator exploits this reliance to perpetrate that fraud. Then concealment or omission. Fraud may involve the act of concealment, suppression, or omission of material information to prevent detection or scrutiny by the others. So perpetrators may engage in efforts to cover up their fraudulent activities and disguise the true nature of their action. कि उनका जो actual nature है कि वो ट्रू नेचर जो है, एक्चुअल नेचर जो है उनके एक्शंस का, उसको क्या करते हैं, वो डिस्गाइज करते हैं. एंड दे मे इन्वॉल्व द सप्रेशन ओमिशन ऑफ मटेरियल इंफॉर्मेशन, ये जानबूझ के वो ओमिट कर जाए जो इंपॉर्टेंट इंफॉर्मेशन उसको शो नहीं कर रहे हैं, जिससे कि उनकी जो डिटेक्शन है वो नहीं हो पाए फ्रॉडुलेंट एक्टिविटी की. Then next is resulting loss or harm. It may result, अगर इस तरीके से conceal करते हैं information, true and fair view नहीं दिखाते हैं, then what it may happen, it may result in financial loss, harm or damage to the victim or affected parties, जो भी parties affected होंगे उससे. So fraudulent conduct may cause financial losses, reputational damage may also it may cause, legal liabilities it may cause, or other adverse consequences on the victims. Legal liabilities means penalties may be imposed on the victim जिसको fraudulent activity में फंसाया गया, जिसे नहीं पता कि that he has been in the fraud activity, then penalty may be imposed on him or her. Okay, so it may result in loss or harm to the victim. Then fraud can manifest in various forms and contexts, including financial statements में आप fraud कर सकते हो. कैसे कर सकते हो कि आप मिस रिप्रेजेंट कर दो, गलत रिप्रेजेंट कर दो फाइनेंशियल पोजीशन को, कैश फ्लोज जो है इनफ्लोज आउटफ्लोज गलत शो कर दो, एसेट का मिस अप्रोप्रिएशन कर दो. ठीक है, करप्शन एंड ब्राइबरीज, देयर कंज्यूमर फ्रॉड, इन्वेस्टमेंट फ्रॉड. ठीक है, कंज्यूमर्स को फॉल्स जो है गलत एडवर्टाइजमेंट, फॉल्स एडवर्टाइजमेंट या प्रोडक्ट गलत एडवर्टाइज करके जो है गलत चीजें प्रोवाइड कर दो. अनऑथराइज्ड यूज ऑफ फाइनेंशियल इंफॉर्मेशन में भी देयर. इन्वेस्टमेंट से रिलेटेड जो स्कीम्स हैं हमारे सिक्योरिटीज और इन्वेस्टमेंट्स के, फाइनेंशियल प्रोडक्ट्स के, पॉन्जी स्कीम्स आर देयर, पिरामिड स्कीम्स आर देयर, इनसाइडर ट्रेडिंग, मार्केट मैनिपुलेशन, in सब के through investment frauds they can do. Then tax fraud also they can do while manipulating the tax obligations, and which includes under reporting of the income or overstating their deductions or engaging in the fraudulent tax schemes to avoid paying taxes. So these are some types of fraud that we will discuss in detail. So fraud taxonomy basically is categorized into the fraudulent activities which are based on features, methods, or schemes used and facilitating the identification, analysis, and prevention of fraud risk in various domains. Now, the main question is, why is a fraud committed? Why a person commits a fraud or why a fraud is committed? Basically, there are various reasons, and understanding the motivations behind these fraudulent behavior among the persons, it provides insight into various causes and factors that contribute to its occurrence. Okay, so while the specific reasons for committing the fraud, it depends upon individual circumstances and contexts and some common motivations. These includes first financial gain. कि अगर कोई person अपना financial gain चाहता है, okay, this is the primary reason for committing fraud. If a person wants a financial gain, if a company wants a financial gain, this is the primary concern for committing fraud. So perpetrators may engage in fraudulent activities to obtain money, to obtain assets, resources unlawfully, and often driven by greed, financial pressures, or desire for personal enrichment. Okay, so financial gain is the first ingredient, or you can say the motivating motivation or motivating behavior for committing a fraud. Then pressure and need. If a person or a need, whether we can say that he or she is unemployed, or he or she has unexpected expenses, company has unexpected expenses, and so much of debt company has. Okay, so these things may pressurize the individuals to do a fraudulent behavior by addressing immediate financial needs or alleviating the financial stress. So this is the second motivating behavior while doing a fraud, कि उनके pressure है, उन्हें need है financial चीजों की, कि वो unemployed हैं, उनके पास debt बहुत ज्यादा है, unexpected expenses they had. So in that case they can do the fraudulent activity. Then next is lifestyle or status also is the main factor कि उन्हें they had to maintain their lifestyle and status. They may have job insecurity and dissatisfaction. Opportunities and rationalization may be there, means when individual perceive opportunities to exploit weaknesses or loopholes in the internal control, or they may rationalize their actions by justifying a fraud or victimless crime, minimizing the perceived harm or consequences. This may also be the motivating behavior. Then addiction to the gambling. Addiction or gambling means कि individuals जो स्ट्रगल कर रहे हैं विद देयर एडिक्शन इश्यूज, कि उन्हें इस चीज का एडिक्शन है, जैसे कि वो दे डू द गैम्बलिंग, so they are addicted to do the gambling, so they may resort to the fraudulent behavior because of their habits, compulsive habits. Okay, so to cover the losses from the gambling activities, they may do the fraudulent behavior. Then pressure to meet the targets and expectations, like in current environment, every employee, if I say, is facing some kind of pressure from their companies. Some employees may face ki they had to meet these performance targets, these financial goals, these external expectations, so they may do the fraudulent activities to achieve those desired outcomes and avoid negative consequences. Okay, then perceived injustice and entitlement. Preparators may feel a sense of entitlement or perceived injustice, believing that कि they owned a compensation or benefits they have not received legitimately. Okay, कि जो benefits and compensation they should get, they hadn't get that. So for that purpose they may do the fraudulent behavior. Okay, so they may justify their fraudulent behavior by saying that they had their grievances and they had not received those expectations or benefits, so that's why they had do that. Okay, so this may be also motivating behavior. The next is lack of ethics or moral value. लैक ऑफ एथिक्स और मॉरल वैल्यू बेसिकली जो भी एथिकल स्टैंडर्ड्स हैं, मॉरल वैल्यूज, इंटीग्रिटी है, दे मे मोर प्रोन टू एंगेज इन फ्रॉडुलेंट बिहेवियर. ओके, जिन इंडिविजुअल्स में ये सब चीज नहीं है, कि उनके अंदर मॉरल वैल्यूज नहीं है, दे डिडंट हैव एनी एथिकल स्टैंडर्ड्स, दे डिडंट हैव एनी मॉरल वैल्यू और इंटीग्रिटी, दे मे सब्जेक्ट or they may are more prone to, they are more prone to engaging in fraudulent behavior. So why they engage in fraudulent behavior if they don't have any ethical standard or moral value? So what they do, they first prioritize themselves, their self interest, their personal gain, their gratification over ethical principles or societal norms. So because of those factors they can go do the fraudulent activities, or they can have the fraudulent behavior. The next is understanding the motivations. So basically, while understanding what are the why a fraud is committed, so understanding the motivations behind understanding the motivation behind fraud is essential for developing effective prevention, detection, mitigation strategies. Okay, so by addressing these all factors underlying, such as financial pressure, organizational culture, ethical standards, overnight mechanisms, individuals and organizations can reduce the likelihood of fraud occurrence and foster the environment's integrity, transparency, and accountability if they understand these motivations behind the fraud. Okay, so this was about why a person commits fraud, or why a fraud is committed. Okay, now next question is who commits fraud. Fraud can be committed by various individuals. These are the previously that I had discussed, these are the factors, these are the motivational factors, you can say common motivational factors that are responsible for doing the fraud. Okay, now who are the persons or who commits fraud. Okay, ये तो था कि why is fraud committed. Now the question is who commits fraud. Fraud can be committed by various individuals or entities across different sectors, different contexts. So while there is no single profile or feature that defines the perpetrators of fraud, or individuals who commit fraud may fall into several categories based on their roles, their positions and motivations. Okay, so based on their role, position, and motivation, you can identify who commits fraud. So first is employees. Employees basically, employees, those are related with the organization. It includes executives, managers, staff at all levels may do the fraud by exploiting their access to assets, information, internal control. So these includes activities like falsification of financial records or abuse of the authority for personal gain or embezzlement, all these activities. Okay, second is management. Management may also involve, management may include board of directors, executives who are doing the decision making activities may involved in the fraudulent activities. Second is vendors and suppliers, vendors management, how they can do the fraud activity to meet the performance target. They may manipulate the financial record, they may the financial problems. Okay, though for earning more, they may do provide the falsification of financial records. Okay, so fraudulent financial reporting they can do. They can misrepresent the financial performance of the business. So likewise they can do the fraudulent activity. The next is vendors and suppliers. Vendors and suppliers, external parties like those who are directly or indirectly related to the business, like vendors, suppliers, contractors. They may commit fraud by overcharging the goods and services, by providing the false invoices, wrong invoices. Means they are providing the invoices. They are not, ऐसा नहीं है कि they are not invited, they are not providing the invoices, but they are providing the wrong invoices. Okay, or colluding with the employees to obtain undue payments or kickbacks. So these are the fraudulent activities done by the vendors and suppliers. Then customers and clients, they may counter individuals or entities that interact with organizations. Includes जो भी individuals or entities हैं. Okay, individuals or entities that interact with the organization, जैसे कि customers, clients, counterparties. They may do the fraud through schemes like identifying the theft, credit card fraud, insurance fraud, or false claims they can do for the product or services they had provided. Okay, like these are the frauds done by the customers and clients. Then third parties in the form of consultants, advisors, agents, intermediaries who are related to the business, and they are the third party, and they are in third party as they are doing their work. They can exploit the relationship or positions by frauding the organizations or individuals, which may include the conflict of interest, bribery they had taken, or collusion with the insiders. Then there is organized crime. Criminal organizations or syndicates may engage sophisticated fraud schemes जिसमें वो target कर सकते हैं business को, financial institutions को, government agencies को, and they may involved in the money laundering, investment fraud, cyber crime, or trafficking in counterfeit the goods. These activities. Then government officials or government or public officials, you can say government employees, you can say, they may also commit fraud by abusing their positions, by taking the wrong use of their positions, misappropriating the public funds, accepting the bribes, engaging in other corrupt practices that violates the public trust and undermine the government integrity. The next, so government officials may also be in the fraudulent activities. Then professionals in the field of accounting, law, healthcare, also health insurance sector also may commit fraud by engaging themselves in the legal and unethical practices such as billing fraud, like in insurance fraud, the insider trading, and professional misconduct. These things they can do. Last is your individuals in the position of trust. Individuals who hold position of trust or fiduciary responsibility, जैसे कि trustees हैं, guardians हैं, power of attorney holders हैं, they may exploit their relationship with the vulnerable individuals so that they can commit the fraud, such as elder financial abuse or estate fraud, like that. Okay, so these fraud perpetrators that are coming from the diverse backgrounds, that may be customers, management, professionals, individuals in the position of trust, they may have different motivations, different opportunities, and rationalization of the action. So financial while doing the financial audit, or the role of forensic audit and fraud examination is what they had to identify these potential perpetrators and understand their features, their behaviors, their incentives, because this is essential for implementing effective fraud prevention, detection, mitigation measures across the organization and sectors. Okay, so we are taking a 5-minute break. Then we will continue the next topic of unit second, meaning and nature of corporate fraud. Okay, so the meaning and nature of corporate fraud, इसका मतलब क्या है? What is the meaning? What is the nature? And what are the concepts of fraud under Companies Act 2013. Okay, so we had a 5-minute break, then we will continue this. Okay. Okay, so just a second. Okay, so now next topic is meaning and nature of corporate fraud. Corporate fraud basically means to do the misappropriation or unlawful activities by the individuals or entities within the corporate environment with the aim of obtaining the financial gain, okay, and maintaining their personal interest or achieving their illegitimate objectives. So basically it involves deliberate actions or omissions that violates the legal, ethical and regulatory standards, undermining the integrity of financial reporting and harm the stakeholders. Stakeholders include your shareholders, customers, public. So what is the meaning of corporate fraud and what are the nature of corporate fraud, that we will discuss in detail. First of all, meaning of corporate fraud. Corporate fraud means within an organization they are doing the misappropriations and misleading of information. So deception, first is your deception and misrepresentation. Deception and misrepresentation is the first thing that you had to consider while analyzing the corporate fraud. Involves intentional deception or misrepresentation of the financial information, business transactions, or operational activities to conceal underdoing, conceal the wrongdoing or undergoing activities or manipulate those outcomes. So it may include showing the wrong statements related to financial statements, wrong things related to financial statements or falsifying them, or doing the changes in the revenues by inflating the values, then understating the expenses and concealing the liabilities, hiding the liabilities. So deception and misrepresentation they can do. Then abuse of power and authority. The preparators of corporate fraud, they can exploit their positions of authority to access some resources or to take some control over the decision making process so that they can do the fraudulent activities. So it may involve executives, managers, employees who misuse the company's funds, assets and confidential information for their own personal gain. Okay, then violation of legal and ethical standards. Corporate fraud violates the legal status, ethical principles, regulatory requirements governing corporate governance, financial reporting, business conduct. So, fraudulent activities may include insider trading, embezzlement, accounting fraud, or securities fraud. Then there may be financial harm or losses. Because of these corporate frauds within an organization, it may lead to losses, damage, penalties to the organization, to its stakeholders and broader economy and to the broader economy. Okay, so it erodes the shareholders value basically, and it undermines the investors confidence. They don't have confidence now in the company because of these fraudulent activities. It may lead to bankruptcy. Regulatory sanctions may be done, may not be done. Okay, reputational damage may be done. So this may lead to the financial harms or losses to the organization and various stakeholders. And if I say about impact on stakeholders, stakeholders basically are the people who are directly indirectly related to the business, like shareholders, employees, customers, suppliers, creditors, public. So it erodes the trust of those stakeholders in that business or in that corporate institutions. It impairs market integrity. It undermines the stability and efficiency of those financial markets. So it does have the impact on stakeholders. Now, this was the meaning and nature of corporate fraud. We will discuss complexity and sophistication. Nature of corporate fraud means it may be complex, sophisticated, and should be carefully orchestrated so that they can evade detection and scrutiny. So preparators may employ elaborate methods, scheme structures to conceal those fraudulent activities and manipulate the financial results. Then second is collusion and complexity. Collusion basically means a secret agreement or it may be complex. So corporate frauds often involves this collusion or complexity among multiple individuals or entities within the or outside the organization. So it may involve executives or employees or suppliers, customers, external advisors who may conspire to perpetrate the fraudulent schemes for their own mutual benefits. Now, next is about nature, incentive and pressure. Incentive and pressure, they may have perpetrators of the corporate fraud may be motivated by various incentives, various pressures, or various opportunities to exploit this vulnerability or weaknesses, or you can say the loopholes in that internal control or oversight mechanism, so that financial incentives or performance pressure or personal grievances also may lead to the fraudulent behavior among them. Cultural and tone at the top. Organizational culture and tone at the top play a significant role in shaping attitudes, behaviors, and norms regarding the ethical conduct and integrity. So, environments that prioritize short term gains, aggressive targets, or tolerance in the ethical behavior should foster the conditions conducive to the corporate fraud. Okay, then how they can detect and prevention the challenges. So detection and prevention is basically corporate fraud poses significant challenges while detecting and prevention due to its complexity, due to its evolving tactics. So traditional control mechanisms such as internal audits or financial system audit or external audit they are doing, it is insufficient to uncover that fraudulent activity. So they had to detect and prevent those fraudulent activity. Then regulatory and enforcement responses. Regulatory authorities, law enforcement agencies, या फिर government bodies, they should implement the measures to detect, to identify, to investigate, and prosecute the corporate fraud. These includes regulatory reforms, enforcement conditions and actions, whistleblower protections, and collaboration with the international partners to combat, to control the cross-border fraud schemes. Okay, so in regulatory and enforcement and responses, what they had to do, they had to regulatory authorities, law enforcement agencies, government bodies, all these should implement various sufficient measures to identify, to investigate, to prosecute the corporate fraud. So in summary, we can say that corporate fraud includes various types of practices, illicit behaviors, and illicit behaviors which are aimed to enrich the individuals or entities at the expense of shareholders, employees, and other stakeholders. So its nature is characterized by the complexity, collusion, एक secret agreement, its incentives जो भी provide हो रहे हैं, whatever the incentives they are getting, challenges while they are detecting the fraud, they had to face prevention, how they can prevent it, and require the concentrated efforts of organization, regulators, and societies to control this. Okay, to this combat this effectively. So this was about this frauds. And now concept of fraud under Companies Act 2013. What are the concept of fraud in Companies Act 2013? What it had defined it. So under Companies Act 2013, concept of fraud is addressed primarily in section 447. Okay, in section 447 it has been identified, and which defines the fraud and outlines the consequences of those found guilty of committing the fraud within the context of corporate entities. So we will discuss about the concept of fraud under Companies Act according to section 447. First is definition of fraud according to section 447 of the Companies Act 13. Fraud is defined broadly as an act or omission involving deception, concealment of information. Deception means organization is making a false representation, including misleading statements. Then concealment of information, omission or suppression of facts with an intent to deceive, whether by conduct, statement, or omission. So this is fraud according to section 447. Then intention to deceive means it is the key element of fraud under section 447 is the presence of intention to deceive, कि उनका intention है that they want to mislead, they want to deceive or defraud, either through the affirmative actions, making false representation, or through passive acts, means while omitting the main facts, while not disclosing the material facts which are most important. Okay, so this is the definition according to Companies Act section 447 of fraud. Now, consequences of fraud. What are the consequences? First is criminal liability. Criminal liability, basically the individuals found guilty of committing fraud under section 447 may face criminal liability, which includes imprisonment for the term of not less than 6 months, की 6 महीने की उनको imprisonment हो जाए, सजा हो जाए जेल की, which may extend up to 10 years. Additionally, they may subject to fines or penalties that should not be less than the amount involved in the fraud, and which may extend to 3 times the amount involved in the fraud. So this criminal liability they had to face if they had done a fraud. Second is restitution and compensation. In addition to these penalties, those found who are guilty of doing fraud, they are required to make restitution and pay compensation to the company or any other affected parties for the loss they had incurred as a result of those fraudulent activity. Okay? So what they had to do, they had to pay the compensation amount to the party that has incurred a loss, that has faced that loss because of that fraudulent activity. Then civil liability, company या जो भी other affected party है may also include initiate civil proceedings against the perpetrators of fraud to recover damages or seek other remedies available under civil law. Okay, they may go to the civil liability. Also भी अगर they may go to the civil law. Then dishonorable qualification means जो individuals convicted of fraud under Companies Act 13 may also face disqualification from serving their positions. If they are directors, they may face disqualification regarding their position. They may be facing disqualification from serving as a director or holding any other position of authority with the corporate entities under prescribed law. So their qualifications may be suspended. Okay, so this thing may also be happened if they are involved in the fraudulent activities. So these are the consequences of fraud. The criminal liability may be there. They had to pay the fine. They had to pay the penalty. They may be available. They had to face the civil law, or they had to disqualify their qualification or dishonor their disqualification, means their positions that they are holding with the authority with the corporate entities that may face the disqualification. So these are the consequences. Then reporting requirements means according to section Companies Act 2013 and according to section 447. Okay, these are the definitions of fraud and consequences of fraud. Now, according to section 2000, according to Companies Act 2013, what are the reporting requirements? What are the requirements regarding reporting? Okay, so obligations kya hai? So obligations to report are, first of all, Companies Act 2013 impose an obligation on the auditors, directors, officers, employees, or any other person who are related to the company to report instances of fraud to the appropriate authorities. The person who are directly or indirectly related with the company or organization, they had to report if they feel any fraud has been done in the company. Then second is reporting to the, first is obligation to report, means these stakeholders are obliged to report it if they observe any fraudulent activity. Second is reporting to central government. Any person who it may be, whoever it may be, any person on reasonable grounds, if they believe that an offense of fraud involving an amount of rupees 10 lakh or such higher amount as may be prescribed or has been committed against the company shall report this matter to the central government within prescribed time frame in the prescribed manner. Okay, अगर 10 लाख या उससे ज्यादा amount का अगर किसी भी person को on reasonable grounds they believe that this fraudulent activity is being occurring or has been occurred, they had to report it in the to the central government in the prescribed time frame when prescribed manner to the central government. Okay, so we can conclude that under the Companies Act 2013, the concept of fraud includes deception, concealment with an intent to deceive, and it carries significant legal consequences, including criminal liability, civil penalties, restitution, and disqualification of holding the office or holding that post. So the act also imposes reporting obligations on various stakeholders if they believe that there is going some fraudulent activity in the organization, or it has happened and it is above the amount of rupees 10 lakh. Then to ensure the transparency and accuracy in the corporate governance, they are obliged to provide that information to the central government. Okay, so this was about frauds according to Companies Act 2013. Now, frauds for and against a company. Frauds in the company and for the company and against the company. So these two things we will discuss. Both for companies have significant financial, operational, and reputational implications. So what is the frauds for the company means? First is financial statement fraud. In frauds for the company, basically financial statement fraud can happen position cash flows. Okay, while doing the financial statement fraud, what they are doing, they are wrongly showing or manipulating the financial statements. Okay, कि उसमें गलत शो करना, wrongly showing the financial performance of the company, wrongly showing the inflow and outflow of cash. Okay, so while describing the financial statement, they are manipulating those records. Second, for example, inflating the revenues, increasing the expenses, manipulating the reserves, misrepresenting the assets to artificially boost the profitability and hide the financial performance related problems. So this is the second is embezzlement. Embezzlement occurs when individuals entrusted with the company's funds or assets and misappropriate them for their own personal use. Okay. So it occurs when individuals use the company's assets for their personal use or company's funds for their personal use. For example, जैसे कि they divert the company's funds into personal accounts, they falsify the expenses reports, wrongly showing their expense reports ki itne expense हुए but they hadn't occurred, or they steal the inventory for their own personal gains, like some assets they may use for their own personal use. So these are the examples of embezzlement. Then next is procurement fraud. Procurement fraud is the fraudulent कि secret agreement they had done or bid rigging or kickbacks. Okay, जैसे कि they of in exchange of contracts or inflating the prices or creating a fictitious vendors to generate the fraudulent payments. Okay, so these things they can do. So this procurement of frauds in the frauds of companies there. Then next is insider trading. What insider trading is? It occurs when individual trade the securities based on non-public material information about the company. Like, for example, executives and employees of the trading company stocks based on confidential information about upcoming earnings announcement, do the mergers and acquisitions. Okay, they may trade the stocks based on the information of the company that they had steal. Okay, so executives and employees do the trading based on the confidential information about the upcoming earnings or mergers or acquisitions about the company. So insider trading is that. Then accounting fraud. Accounting fraud basically is what? Manipulating the accounting records and practices so that they can mislead the investors and stakeholders along with the regulatory authorities. Okay, like they may falsify or do the wrongly represent the inventory counts or their expenses or understanding the liabilities to distort the financial performance. Okay, wrongly showing their assets, liabilities, or their revenues, or booking fictitious revenues, etc. Now, frauds, these are the for company. Now, frauds against the company. कि against company ऐसे कौन से frauds हो सकते हैं? Okay, these were in the company. Assets misappropriation. Asset misappropriation is what? It involves theft or misuse of companies' assets, resources, or intellectual properties by the external parties. कि जो assets हैं that may be misappropriated, misused, or maybe theft by the एक्सटर्नल पार्टीज, जैसे कि थेफ्ट ऑफ इन्वेंट्री बाय द एम्प्लॉइज, या फिर अनऑथराइज्ड यूज ऑफ कंपनीज ट्रेडमार्क्स, पेटेंट्स और databases by the other external parties, or company's database has been hacked, or its information has been hacked, or sensitive information has been hacked by the external parties. Then there may be vendor fraud. Vendor fraud means vendors, those who are the suppliers, they engage in deceptive practices or overcharge for the company's goods and services. Like, kaise? They may inflate the prices, they may change the prices, like they may show the rising prices, and they billing, they do not provide the billing for the goods and services. They may collude with the employees to submit their fraudulent invoices. So this thing they may do, they may do. Then next is cyber fraud. Cyber fraud basically involves unauthorized access or manipulation or theft of the company's data, company's system, digital assets through cyber criminal activities like phishing attacks, malware infections, ransomware extortion, or data breaches. These are the some of examples through which they can do the cyber fraud. The next is false claims. False claims means they are submitting the fraudulent or inflated claims for the reimbursement of their payments to the company or government agencies. Like they are falsifying the expenses report, kitne expense हुए, but in actually they hadn't. Okay, they are overbilling their services rendered, that they had provided these services and this is the bill. But in actual, they hadn't provided that much of service. So extra amount they are showing, or submitting the false insurance claim for their fictitious damages. So these are some of the false claims they can show. Then bribery and corruption. It involves offering or soliciting or accepting the bribes, kickbacks, or other improper benefits to influence the business decisions or gain unfair advantages, like offering bribes to the company's officials or employees in exchange for giving the contract or providing the important information. Okay, so like that they can do the bribery and corruption. So both type of frauds can have severe consequences for the companies, which include financial loss, legal liability, damage to the reputation, erosion of stakeholders' trust. So they had to implement a robust internal control so that they can prevent these fraudulent activities, and ethically governance practices is essential so that they can minimize the risk of doing fraud, and interest of the companies and stakeholders can be protected. So this was about uh, this was about against and for frauds for the company and frauds against the company that we had discussed. Now last topic is victims of fraud. Who are the basic victims, or who are the survivors, sorry, victims, those the persons who are facing these frauds, who are बेसिकली जिनको अफेक्ट होगा इन फ्रॉड से. दे मे बी कंपनी, दे मे बी पर्संस इंडिविजुअल, दे मे बी बोर्ड ऑफ डायरेक्टर्स, जो भी पर्टिकुलरली इन फ्रॉड से अफेक्ट होगा, हु आर दे. ओके, विक्टिम्स कौन कौन है? सो विक्टिम्स ऑफ फ्रॉड encompasses individuals, organizations, entities that suffer harm, losses and damages because of these fraudulent activities done by the perpetrators. So frauds can have wide ranging impact on various stakeholders, which includes individuals, ठीक है, consumers, individuals में आपके consumers, customers, investors, shareholders, employees, workers, elderly and vulnerable individuals may be included. And in organization, it may include companies, business, government organizations, those who are related to that business, manufacturing, or non-profit organizations, financial institutions. They may be affected. The next is society and economy. Society may those who are paying the tax and public funds, consumers and market integrity, law enforcement and regulatory authorities. Those are the victims of fraud. So this was about your unit second. I think unit first and second has been completed. Now we will go forward for your unit third. But before proceeding it, if you do have any doubt, you can ask me. Madhu, Priya, Anshika, are you there? You may write in chat if you do have any problem. Otherwise, at the last of conducting the class time, last 15 minutes, we will discuss for the doubts, okay, in the chat box. So now next unit is your unit third, types of corporate frauds. What are the types of corporate frauds that we have discussed, like misappropriation of assets, manipulation of the financial statements, bribery, corruption, and what are the procedures related to frauds, and what is corporate espionage and fraud in e-commerce, what are the fraud prevention strategies, how these can be prevented, how consumers and businesses can be prevented from these frauds. Okay, so one by one, unit third, we will discuss. First is corporate fraud encompasses a various a variety of deceptive practices and illicit activities aimed at defrauding companies, investors, shareholders, and other stakeholders. So it includes corporate fraud encompasses various deceptive practices and illicit activities which are aiming at defrauding the companies, investors, shareholders, and other stakeholders. And these frauds can occur across different areas of the corporate operations, and it involves various schemes and tactics. So an financial investigator, forensic accounting and fraud examination auditing जो auditor है, they had to identify those tactics and those various schemes that the predators are following while doing the fraud. Okay, now what are the types of fraud? First is financial statement fraud. Financial statement fraud, as I already had said, it includes manipulating the records related to financial statements. Okay, manipulate करना उनको, उनको wrongly show करना, गलत अमाउंट शो करना, ओके, omit कर देना गलती से या जानबूझकर चीजें omit कर देना. So it includes revenue recognition fraud. Revenue recognition means inflating the revenues by prematurely recognizing the revenue or booking fictitious sales transaction. मतलब कि जो रेवेन्यूज हैं उनकी वैल्यूज को ज्यादा शो करना है, इन्फ्लेट कर देना. Then second is expense manipulation, means कि artificially you can decrease the cost or inflate the profits. So you are manipulating the expenses artificially, you actually they are not occurring, so you are manipulating it, you are showing more expenses. Then asset valuation fraud, it includes what? Asset valuation means कि you are valuing the assets value more. Okay, overstating means more, you are actually जो value है उसे ज्यादा show करना. So you are showing more value of the more value of the assets in compared to actual value. So overstating the value of assets in case of inventory, in case of receivables, in case of investments, to inflate the company's financial position. Then reserves manipulation, manipulating reserves or provisions to smooth earnings, create slush funds, or hide losses, such as manipulating allowance for doubtful accounts and warranty reserves. Okay, so they can manipulate the reserves and provisions also, and they are failing to disclose the material facts which provides misleading disclosures related to financial statements or other corporate communications to conceal adverse information. Okay, so they can't mainly in proper disclosure means they are not disclosing the true and actual view of that financial report. Okay, financial statement, so they are doing the, or they are not disclosing the material information which is providing the actual thing about that company, actual position, financial performance or financial position of that organization. So they are concealing that information. Next is corruption and bribery. Corruption and bribery basically means bribery and kickbacks, which means offering, soliciting, or accepting bribes, kickbacks, and other improper payments to influence the business decision, to secure the contracts and gain the unfair advantage. ठीक है, through bribery, रिश्वत लेके. ठीक है, वो what they are doing, they are doing the improper payments so that they can do the business decisions. उनके business decision को वो change कर सकें, influence कर सकें. They can secure the contracts through bribery, they can gain the unfair advantages. Okay, next is conflict of interest. Conflict of interest, engaging basically means engaging in the activities and transactions which create conflict of interest, such as self dealing, related party transactions, or undisclosed relationship with suppliers and customers. Next is favoritism and nepotism. Favoritism means ki granting a special treatment or preferential treatment, contracts or employment opportunities to the family members, or whether they are their friends or their family members or the persons who are associated without proper disclosure or competitive process, they are offering them employment opportunities. So favoritism and nepotism may be there. So this is also the thing included in the fraudulent activity. Then next is asset misappropriation. Asset misappropriation basically includes embezzlement, inventory theft, intellectual property theft, and fraudulent disbursement. Fraudulent disbursement. If I say about embezzlement, it means misappropriating the company's funds, assets, resources for their own personal use. कि अपने personal use के लिए what they are doing, they are misappropriating the company funds. They are using their assets. They are using their resources for their own personal use. Then inventory theft means they are doing the theft of inventory. They are diverting the inventory, materials, supplies for their own personal gain, or they are reselling it, or they're selling it through the external parties. Okay, so it may be an inventory theft. Then intellectual property theft means unauthorized use, theft, or misappropriation of intellectual property, trade secrets, or proprietary information for their own advantage, for their own commercial gain. They are using the unauthorized use of the intellectual property. Then fraudulent disbursements. Fraudulent schemes involve disbursements of funds such as billing schemes, payroll fraud, or check the tampering, or fraudulent expenses reimbursements. Okay, so disbursements basically includes billing schemes related, yeah, payroll fraud they can do, or they can check the tampering or fraudulent expenses. Okay, now regulatory compliance fraud. Regulatory compliance fraud means false reporting, means they are not submitting the false report or misleading information to this government agencies, to these regulatory authorities or industry regulators, so that they can evade compliance obligations or obtain the regulatory approvals. So through false reporting, getting trying to get the regulatory approvals they can do. Then market manipulation means ki manipulating the security markets, exchange rates through fraudulent practices like insider trading, market reading, pump and dump up themes, schemes, etc. Okay. Then environmental and safety violations, concealing and misrepresenting environmental violations like workplace safety hazards they are not following, the product defects they are going on. So to avoid the regulatory penalties and reputational damage regarding their workplace safety hazards or their product defects, what they are doing, they are misrepresenting the environmental violations, and they're concealing that information. Now next is cyber fraud. Cyber fraud basically includes data breaches, means they are getting the unauthorized access of the sensitive data. They are doing the theft of that theft and disclosure of that sensitive data, customer information, trade secrets through cyber attacks they are getting, hacking their databases, insider threats they can do. So data breach is that. So cyber frauds they can commit, phishing and social engineering they can commit, like they are using deceptive techniques to trick the employees, customers, and business partners in divulging them to provide them the confidential information, login credentials or financial data. तो उन सबको involve करके tricking the employees, so that they can employees or customers or business partners, so that they can provide their company's sensitive data, login credentials, and financial data, so that they can do. Then ransomware extortion, malicious softwares designed to encrypt and block the access to company data or systems, followed by demand of ransom payments to restore the access. These may also happen in the cyber fraud. Now next is insider trading. Insider trading and market abuse basically is what? Trading the securities based on material non-public information about company, its financial performance and pending corporate events. Okay, so this is based on leaking the important very sensitive information about that company. Then market manipulation is basically engaging in the deceptive practices so that they can manipulate the security prices, trading volumes, or market indices for their own personal gain and to deceive those investors. Okay, so these are just few examples of the corporate frauds which may occur. So each type of fraud has their own risks, their own challenges that companies, investigators, regulators had to take care of. And they had to highlight the importance of their robust internal control techniques, their ethical governance practices, so that they can prevent, detect, and deter these fraudulent activities. Now, corruption and bribery. Next is corruption and bribery. Corruption and bribery basically are significant types of corporate fraud, which it involves offering or acceptance of improper payment that is favoring to influence the business decisions so that they can gain unfair advantages and have their illicit benefits. So why corruption and bribery in corporate sector, why they are occurring, and what does it means? Bribery basically what it is: offering or promising or giving, accepting something of value such as money, gift, or favors to influence the actions or decisions of individuals in positions of authority, trust. ऐसे individuals or पर्सन्स जिनके पास कुछ डेजिग्नेशन, इंपॉर्टेंट डेजिग्नेशन है, उनको इन्फ्लुएंस करना, उनके एक्शंस को, उनके डिसीजंस को फॉर देयर ओन फेवर, दैट इज ब्राइबरी. और वो ब्राइबरी कैसे इन्फ्लुएंस कर सकते हो? बाय प्रोवाइडिंग ब्राइब इन द फॉर्म ऑफ कैश, in the form of kickbacks, in the form of gifts and entertainment. Okay, so through cash payment की पैसा दे दिया जिससे कि वो कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स ले सके, उनके इन्फ्लुएंस कर सकें डिसीजंस को. किकबैक्स प्रोवाइड कर दी कि पेमेंट्स मेड बाय द सप्लायर्स टू एम्प्लॉइज टू एक्सचेंज, कि जो सप्लायर्स हैं उन्होंने एम्प्लॉइज को पेमेंट कुछ इन द फॉर्म ऑफ ब्राइब दे दिया कि ये जो गुड्स हम सप्लाई कर रहे हैं हमें ये कॉन्ट्रैक्ट मिल जाए. उनको गिफ्ट प्रोवाइड कर दिए, लैविश एंटरटेनमेंट चीजें प्रोवाइड कर दी. सो to influence the decision of the persons, those who are holding an important position in the organization, providing them bribe in the form of cash payment or kickbacks or gift entertainment, they are doing the fraudulent activities. Like examples: offering bribes to government officials, paying kickbacks to the vendors, providing gifts to the clients or business partners to gain the preferential treatment in the business dealings. Next is corruption. Corruption is what basically it refers to abuse of entrusted power or authority for their own personal gain, influence, or benefit, often involving dishonest or unethical conduct by individuals or entities. So it is in a corruption, and forms of corruption are that we already had discussed. It may be in the form of embezzlement, nepotism, conflict of interest, or extortion. Okay, embezzlement means ki misappropriation of fund or assets you had done in position, जो ऐसे persons हैं trustee worthy positions पर हैं, authorities हैं, they are misappropriating the funds and assets for their own use. Okay, nepotism means ki if there is a family member, friend, or associate, those who are very related to you, so you are making them employed in the business and providing some extra benefits. So this is about nepotism. Then conflict of interest, it means engaging in the activities that creates the conflict between personal interest and officials duties or obligations. Then extortion is coercing or compelling, making the agreement, basically compelling the individuals to provide money or benefits through threat or intimidation or abuse of power. By showing your power, you are threatening the employees to provide some form of information, or compelling them to provide steal the important information. Okay, so this is extortion. These are examples like misusing of company funds, awarding contract or promotions based on personal relationship, then concealing the conflict of interest, engaging in self-dealing transactions to benefit personally. Okay, so now what are the consequences of this? Consequences basically are in the form of legal and regulatory risk, means bribery and corruption can violate the domestic and international laws, like including the US Foreign Corrupt Practices, UK Bribery Act, or United Nations Convention Against Corruption, which may lead to penalties that are legal, and it may lead to legal fines, penalties, and sanctions. Then reputational damage means when the customer trust has been damaged then it may lead to these bribery and corruption scandals may lead to repute the harm of the reputational damage, or it may lead to loss of customer trust, and it may damage the brand integrity and impact the shareholders value and long term business viability. Then there may be financial losses, like it may lead to financial losses through inflated cost or inefficient operations, loss of contracts or regulatory fines, undermining the profitability and shareholders return. Ethical erosion may also have maybe there, like corruption and bribery may erode the ethical standards that have to be followed. It may erode the integrity, it may erode the corporate culture, fostering the climate of dishonesty, distrust and misconduct within the organization. So these are the some of the risks associated with the corruption and bribery, which should be which the company should take care of, and accordingly they had to do the plan their control activities and governance framework, so that they can emphasize the transparency, accountability and culture of integrity throughout the organization. So while conducting due diligence on business partners, suppliers, parties and third parties, it can help to identify, address potential corruption risk in the business relationships. Now, next is misappropriation of assets. Next, corporate fraud. So, misappropriation of assets, basically, we had discussed, it involves theft, misuse, or misapplication of companies' funds, assets, and resources by the consumers for their own personal gain or unauthorized purpose. So, इसमें first of all is embezzlement. It includes embezzlement occurs when individuals who are interested with the company's fund, assets, and resources intentionally misappropriate or steal them for their own personal use. Okay, तो वो क्या करते हैं? For their own personal use, they steal the, or for enrichment of their own, or for their own personal use, they intentionally steal or misappropriate the use of assets, companies funds, companies assets, okay, or companies resources. जैसे कि, for example, diverting the cash receipts from the sales, customers' payment, or company's account into personal bank accounts, like that, falsifying the expense reports, stealing the inventory equipments for their own personal and reselling them or disposing of them. Okay, now fraudulent disbursements. Fraudulent disbursements basically includes schemes and practices so that so that they can fraudulently disburse the company's funds and make unauthorized payments for their own personal gain. Okay, like billing schemes through checking the tampering के अलावा payroll fraud they can do, manipulating the payroll records and timekeeping systems, then or employee data to generate unauthorized payment, salary advances, or ghost employees they had created, and on the basis of for those ghost employees they are taking the payments. Okay, so these types of frauds they can do. Third is theft of inventory or assets. Inventory or assets basically means taking the unauthorized or removing or disposing the company's property, goods and services, or material things for their own personal use. Okay, so unauthorizedly they are taking the company's assets for their own personal use, or maybe reselling it. Okay, so theft of inventory and assets they can do. Then intellectual property theft also they can do, which involves unauthorized use or reproduction of companies intellectual property, trade secrets and information for their own personal gain, like copying, downloading and transferring the confidential business plans, product designs, proprietary software or personal devices or computers. Now, these are some of the examples. What are the consequences of it? Means if they are doing the misappropriation of assets or manipulation of the financial statement, sorry, misappropriation of the assets, showing wrongly the assets, what are the consequences of it? First, it may lead to financial loss. It may be in the form of like misappropriation of assets. It may lead to significant financial loss through theft, through division of funds, through inventory shrinkage कि आपकी inventory कम हो गई, loss of valuable intellectual property is there. So there may be financial losses. Second is operational disruption. Operational disruption basically means theft or misuse of companies assets for their own use. for their own personal gain. It may disrupt the business operations, production process or supply chains. Okay, तो वहां पे क्या होगा, if they are using or misusing, they are misusing the company's assets for their own personal gains, and then what happens at the time of business operations, जब वहां पे उनकी जरूरत है, it will not be provided because they have been used for their own personal uses. So it may disrupt the business, it may disrupt the business operations, it may disrupt the production process if it is needed there, supply chain, it may lead to delays, disruptions and inefficiencies. Then there is reputational damage. Reputational damage basically includes incidents of assets misappropriation, which may lead to erode the company's reputation, stakeholders' trust. It may damage the relationship with the customer, suppliers, regulatory authorities, and investors. So it may lead to reputational damage also. The next is legal and regulatory risk. Legal and regulatory risk may also be faced if companies are implicated in assets misappropriation scandals. They may face the legal liabilities, they may face the regulatory investigations, fines, sanctions, and legal cost and reputational harm. So these are some of the misappropriation of assets consequences that the company has faced. So company should implement robust internal controls. Their duties should be segregated and they should safeguard their funds, assets, and resources. For that purpose, they had to monitor such mechanisms so that they can safeguard them. So for that purpose, what they had to do, they had to do the regular audits. They had to implement the fraud detection softwares and should promote the culture of transparency, accountability, and ethical conduct throughout the organization. So this was about types of corporate fraud in which we had discussed about misappropriation of assets. Now next is manipulation of financial statements. Manipulation of financial statement basically involves what? Misrepresentation or falsification of financial information that is presented in the company's report statements or disclosures so that they can deceive the stakeholders, the investors and regulatory authorities. So what are the common types of financial statement frauds? First is revenue recognition fraud. Then recording the revenue from the sales transaction before earning. Before earning, you had record the revenue. So it is complete or before company has delivered goods and services. So it may be premature revenue recognition. Then fictitious revenue, creating false sales transactions or customers or contracts to inflate the reports. Okay. And inflate the profitability. This is also the fictitious revenue recognition fraud. Then expense manipulation may be there, that they had improperly capitalized their expenses so that they should be recorded as an operating expense and as a research and development cost in the form of that they can show, or through advertising expenses, maintenance cost, or inflate the reported earnings. In that they can capitalize their expenses. Then understating the expenses means they can deliberately understate their expenses reserves so that they can overstate their profits, and in that way they are creating a reserve that can be used smoothly for their future earnings, as in the form of earnings for their future period. So understating the expenses is also the thing that should be considered. Then asset valuation fraud is there. Asset valuation में क्या होता है कि you are trying to overstate the value of your assets, and concealing the impairments means you are failing to disclose the value of assets, impairment in the value of asset, like if inventory is getting obsolete or there is a decline in market value, impairment of goodwill, to and to avoid recognized losses. So what you are doing, you are failing to recognize the value of those assets, so you are concealing the impairments. So this is the asset valuation fraud. Then liability manipulation may be there. So understanding the liability, off sheet balance liability, off balance sheet liabilities, what are they? So you had to deliberately, what you are doing, understating or omitting the liabilities, कि आपके इतने account payables हैं, you had omitted that, you had omitted the accrued expenses, and you are overstating or inflating the financial ratios. So you are understating the liabilities is also liability manipulation. And off-sheet balance sheet means showing your off-sheet transactions or special purpose entities to conceal your debt. obligations. Okay, conceal your debt obligations or commitments like operating lease or structured finance or arrangements. So the off-sheet balance sheet is also a liability manipulation. The next is disclosure frauds. Disclosure frauds means the important things that are being that are to be disclosed that you had not disclosed, like material omission. Material means the things which are very much important to be disclosed, which are very much material, that you had omitted intentionally. Okay, so failing to disclose the material information, risk or contingencies related to the financial statements or disclosures to the, so that you can mislead the investors or stakeholders about company's financial performance, about company's financial condition, is also a fraud. So material omission is related to disclosure fraud. Then second is misleading disclosure. Misleading disclosure means providing the false or misleading information about the financial results of company, its financial results, along with that its operations, what are the business operations, what are the risks related to it, and creating the uncertainties to provide misleading. So you are not providing these disclosures in actual. So what are consequences of it if you are not providing these frauds, these informations in actual? It may lead to investor loss, it may lead to regulatory enforcement, reputational damage may happen, and market instability may be there. So financial statement fraud can distort the market perceptions and undermine the investors confidence, or leading to, it may lead to volatility in the market, it may disrupt the market position and can decline overall market performance. Okay, so to prevent this financial statement fraud, companies should implement a very robust internal control system so that they can segregate the duties, monitor the mechanisms so to safeguard their reporting processes, and ensure the accuracy, liability, and the integrity of the financial information. So auditors, stakeholders, regulators, while doing independent reviews, audits, and investigations, should detect and deter the fraudulent activities and made the predators accountable for those fraudulent activities. Okay. Now, next is procedure related to frauds. What are the procedures that are related to frauds? First of all, when we go about the procedure, it involves whatever the frauds related to misconduct in relation to internal policies or related to in control procedures of an organization, it is related to that. So whatever the internal or misconducts related to internal policies or internal control in an organization, these are related to that. So these frauds exploit the weakness or loopholes in the operational process, manipulate the transactions. So what are those common types of प्रोसीजर रिलेटेड फ्रॉड्स? फर्स्ट इज प्रोक्योरमेंट फ्रॉड, कि जब हम प्रोसीजर रिलेटेड फ्रॉड्स की बात करते हैं तो विद इन एन ऑर्गेनाइजेशन व्हाट आर दोज? फर्स्ट इज प्रोक्योरमेंट फ्रॉड विच इंक्लूड्स बिड रिगिंग. बिड रिगिंग मीन्स कि कॉन्ट्रैक्ट करना, एक सीक्रेट कॉन्ट्रैक्ट यू आर डूइंग विद द सप्लायर्स एंड कॉन्ट्रैक्टर्स सो दैट यू कैन मैनिपुलेट द बिडिंग प्रोसेस और inflate the prices and allocate contracts unfairly because okay, so you are allowing them. Then next is kickbacks and bribery, offering and accepting the kickbacks from the vendors, bribery from the vendors, suppliers or contractors, so that in exchange you are providing them contract and favorable treatment in the decisions making. So in that form, then invoice fraud you may do. Vendors are submitting the inflated invoices or false invoices for the payment of their goods and services. Then next is expense fraud. Expense fraud basically is falsifying the expenses claim. Employees are submitting the false claims, inflated prices, inflated claims on the receipts, and overstated mileage or personal expenses in the form they are sharing. Then ghost employees they may create. Actually, they are not active employees. They are creating an inactive employees on the payroll system. And on that basis, they are getting the payment and diverting those payment funds in for their own personal gains. Then overtime fraud may be there. Employees fraudulently inflate their working hours, overtime claims, or time off balances by falsifying the timesheets and clocking out for the absent colleagues and manipulating the attendance records. Next is financial control frauds. Financial controls frauds is basically management of employees, override the internal control system, authorization limits, segregation of duties, falsifying the records or conceal the fraud. ठीक है, override करना. Then false documentation means they may provide the documents which are altered, in which they had done some changes in records, approvals, and create the appearance like they are complying with whole policies and regulations and audit requirements. Then unauthorized access means misuse of the company's system database, in which they don't have any access, but by stealing those access, they are misusing the company system and databases so that they can gain the improper access to the sensitive information, and on behalf of that they can gain bribery. In the form of bribery, they can have some payment or something. Okay, now next is compliance and regulatory fraud. It includes regulatory violence, false reporting, concealment of deficiencies. Ki non-compliance with the laws, regulations, industry standards or environmental regulations, safety standards. So regulatory violations they can do, give that they can show that they are doing these things, but actually they are not doing. Then false reporting they may do while providing according to the regulations that they had to do, but they are actually not doing. Then concealing the deficiencies or weakness, whatever the deficiency or leakages are there, they are not disclosing that, they are concealing it. What are the consequences? Financial loss हो सकता है, operational disruption may be there, their reputation may be damaged, and regulatory and legal risks they had to face. So these are some of the response regarding to consequences. Now corporate espionage. Okay, so now this will be discussed in next session. What is corporate espionage, fraud in e-commerce in unit third? Okay. Okay, so I'm stop sharing my screen.
Hello.
So if you have any doubt, we can do solve the doubts regarding your the subject. Till we had discussed about 2.5 units. Anyone had doubt? Otherwise, I will end the meeting and will continue in next session, remaining 2.5 units, in which we will discuss about the in unit 4 banking frauds, insurance frauds, capital market